Okay, again, everyone, this is Mike McGowan, and welcome to NOAA's webinar series. NOAA is very lucky to have so many dedicated volunteer experts who are willing to share their time and talent with the albinism community. The topic for this webinar is bioptic driving, and our presenter tonight is Mr. Chuck Huss. Mr. Huss is nationally known for his work and experience in the area of formalized bioptic driver training and assessment. He received his Master's of Arts degree in Orientation and Mobility from Western Michigan University in 1976. He has worked as an Academy Certified Orientation and Mobility Specialist in the states of Ohio and West Virginia for the past 36 years, serving clients all the way from kindergartners up to senior citizens. Currently, he serves as the coordinator and one of 5 driver rehabilitation specialists working with the full-time West Virginia Bioptic driving program. He has served the West Virginia Division of Rehabilitation Services for the past 30 years. Chuck is a regular presenter at NOAA national conferences and at least one regional conference that I can think of. Chuck is generous with his time in answering inquiries that NOAA receives about bioptic driving. So before we get started, to get a sense of how we're going to do this tonight, the GoToWebinar software allows participants to ask questions using a chat feature. You will see a spot on your screen where you can submit written questions. Feel free to type them in as they come up during the presentation. I'll try to insert those questions into the presentation when appropriate. And for other more general questions, I'll select as many of the questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation and read them to our presenter. We anticipate that the material is going to take about an hour to go through. So we're going to go through Chuck's going to go through as much as he can in the hour, and depending upon how many questions, we might go a little bit over that. But we're going to stay online for up to 90 minutes. So we're thinking that it'll be somewhere between 75 minutes and 90 minutes, and our goal is to answer as many of your questions as possible. I'd also like to let everybody know that the webinar will be posted on NOAA's YouTube channel within a few days or a week. So if you have to leave or experience technical problems, please look for the recording on YouTube. So without any further ado, take it away, Mr. Huss.
Thank you, Mike. Everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. The topic which I've been asked to present on is entitled Steps to Becoming a Bioptic Driver. During the course of the presentation and afterwards, if there's particular issues or concerns that you may have, which you may find more appropriate to talk with me individually, I've placed my current email address and office telephone number on my title page. For those of you that may have a problem reading my email address, I'm going to go ahead and give you that verbally. Lowercase Chuck, C-H-U-C-K, followed by a dot, uppercase capital P, as in Patrick, followed by another dot, lowercase Huss, H-U-S-S, at wv.gov. Telephone number, area code 304-760-7149. The purpose of my presentation tonight is, first of all, for those of you that may have minimal to no knowledge about what bioptic driving is, to give you an overview of it, and then to highlight the basic steps to becoming an actual bioptic driver. Bioptic telescopic lens systems. What are they? More commonly, they're referred to as a bioptic, but truly, this is where sometimes the misconception arises. A lot of times people think that only the telescope is what the low vision person uses. In reality, this type of a unit is a system where a person with a mild to moderate level of central vision loss uses primarily a normal carrier lens prescription, if they do have a refractive error, for about 90 to 95% of the time while driving. and only dip down into the miniature telescope or telescopes for other types of tasks like distant detail detection, color detection, activity detection, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So it's a combination of both a carrier and a telescopic lens unit system. So from this point forward, think of it as a system and just not a miniature telescope. These devices are prescription in nature, and they must come by after being evaluated, fitted, and prescribed by either an optometrist or ophthalmologist that works in the field of low vision. What type of person is likely to benefit from the use of bioptic lens systems for the visual assistance in the driving task? Normally, it's for individuals with full or relatively full fields of view in at least one or preferably both eyes. These same individuals may also have a mild to moderate level of central vision loss, which occupies the central 3 to 5 degrees. Here I show you 3 photographs of some of the most common type of bioptic lens systems currently available in the market. The one in the upper left-hand corner here is referred to as a Designs for Vision Bio Roman number 2. It's a fixed focus type of system and used primarily for a driving aid as a distance spotting task on distance viewing. Up in the upper right-hand corner, this is an example of what we refer to as an Occutech Visual Enhancing System K, the K referring to the fact that the optics inside this type of system are Keplerian, or variable focus. It has a manual focusing knob, so it can be used not only on distance tasks, but intermediate as well as near vision tasks where improvement in clarity of vision is needed. Down here in the lower left is an example of what we call a variable focus Galilean system, and it's been always manufactured and now marketed by a company called Conforma Contact Lens. Bita, this is the type right here. Here's an example of photographs of the systems we just talked about being worn by various individuals. Again, the Designs for Vision Bio 2 system, the Occutech Visual Enhancing System, and the Conforma Bita system. Notice that sometimes one type of system may be preferred over others for things like cosmesis. So oftentimes younger bioptic lens users may prefer the Bita lens system over the others, which may be a little bit more noticeable. How are these devices used during the actual driving task? Normally, an individual will tilt their head and neck back just ever so slightly and view underneath the telescope through the carrier lens so that the upper part of the pupil runs parallel with the bottom of the telescope. This general viewing area is utilized about 90 to 95% of the total driving time. This is the part of the viewing apparatus which we refer to as eye lead time. Likewise, as the individual travels down the roadway, this is where they're also using lateral head and eye scanning through the larger part of the carrier lens. As far as telescopic viewing, this is where it's accomplished by a vertical drop of the head and with the eyes moving upward, and it's used for short-term vertical spotting purposes only, not continuous viewing. It's done in the absence of other critical objects and preferably only on straight or relatively straight stretches of roadway. Now I want to share with you just a couple of minutes what we mean in the absence of other critical objects. When an individual dips down into the telescope to decipher things like detail, color, and distance activity, the individual wants to do so in the absence of objects in their surrounding space cushion around their vehicle. This includes not only ahead of the person, but behind and to either side, including their blind spots. In essence, what is the telescopic portion of the device used for during driving? It's used to detect and identify distance color, detail, or distance activity. For example, when you're approaching and you're first in line at a traffic light to decipher, is it red, amber, or green? Or as you approach a regulatory sign that indicates the speed on that particular type of roadway, it allows you at a more normal distance to decipher the speed off the sign. Or if you look down the photo here, you notice that one of the vehicles is not going either in the same direction or the exact opposite direction as we have pictured this photo on the screen here. So it deciphers the fact that the individual more than likely exited a mutual turn left lane and is turning left across oncoming traffic. Now we're going to get into 12 of the basic steps which I feel are probably the most important, especially for novice, young bioptic lens users. This also applies for first-time bioptic users as well as experienced, but it has particular importance for individuals who may have never expected to drive and now have the possibility of acquiring a driver's license in their respective licensing jurisdiction. So step one is finding out if your respective licensing jurisdiction or state allows bioptic driving. Where can you get that sort of information? One of the most up-to-date websites at the present time is called Bioptic Driving USA, and it was put together by a father and daughter combination who are both optometrists in the Indianapolis, Indiana area, and the website is shown. It's called biopticdrivingusa.com. Another very important website, which contains the names and locations of optometrists who are part of a international organization called the International Academy of Low Vision Specialists. The website there is www.ialvs.com. There you'll find not only the names of individuals that practice clinical low vision and where you can have bioptic telescopes evaluated, fitted, and prescribed, but they will also share with you what are the licensing requirements per licensing jurisdiction across the United States. One of the older organizations, which has been now into effect approximately 8 to 10 years, is called the Bioptic Driving Network Incorporated. The website, www.biopticdriving.org. Not only will you find U.S. states and what the licensing requirements are, but also overseas. This particular slide was put together for purposes of showing you the wide variability of visual acuity that is permitted across states, from East Coast to West Coast, from North Dakota to Texas. And you notice that there are a number of states that require more conservative levels of visual acuity versus those that are much more liberal. The states that are highlighted in yellow, I have not been able to find out information that either would allow or permit the use of telescopes. But all of these states indicate that driving with mild to moderate levels of visual acuity is permitted. 43 of these states also permit the use of telescopes. This is a graph similar to the one I've just presented, and it gives you again an idea of the variability across the country of states that will permit driving with mild to moderate levels of central vision loss. At one time in the 60s and 1970s, the greater majority of states required that you have fairly conservative levels of acuity for driving purposes. As you can see now, from 21 to 2200, we have almost, 26, 28, we have 31 states that allow restrictive driving privileges between 2100 and 2200. And a number of those also permit the use of telescopes. Step number 2. This involves actually contacting the specific licensing jurisdiction. You can normally do this one of two ways. Simply pick up the telephone and call, or email your driver licensing authority. You can get that information on the internet. Who should you talk to? Most oftentimes, the responsibility is that of the Director of Driver Improvement, or perhaps a delegated first-line official who oftentimes assumes the title Supervisor of Medical Services. From there, you can request a packet of application materials for bioptic driving, or if they don't have such materials, then you could request what the contact information is for appropriate referral sources. One thing that I would really like to stress as we go throughout this presentation this evening is, regardless of what state you're from, you may want to take a close look at if program services involving bioptic driving are offered. Is there a system of safeguards in place that will protect you and the general public? For example, does your state require pre, post, and annual vision examinations of individuals with low vision, especially known low vision? Does it require those vision examinations as part of not only the screening process, training process, but the licensing renewal process? That's very important. Likewise, does your particular state or licensing jurisdiction require that a certificate of eligibility or certificate of completion is needed prior to training and post-completion of training? Okay. All right. Next, also find out if there's a required number of hours of driver training required in your particular state. The most common type of hours of driver training is approximately 20 at the present time. Does your state require comprehensive driver license testing? We will get into the pros and cons of this a little bit later in the presentation, but it's important to know. Is there a process for removing mandatory driving restrictions when you first get a license? And lastly, does your state have regulatory or oversight practices which regulate and oversee the annual activities of any formalized program offering formalized bioptic driver training services? Step 3. Contacting vocational rehabilitation agencies is extremely important. Why? Well, it's quite easy. Voc Rehab oftentimes will be a third-party sponsor for anything from initial screening all the way up through completion of services. As an example, in the area of bioptic driving, they will pay for initial eye and or other medical exams if necessary. They may pay part or full the cost of bioptic lens systems, which may be from $450 all the way up through, let's say, $1,900. They may provide or pay for all of the services involved in both being screened as well as trained. And once you acquire that license, they may also sponsor you in full or part for college education, vocational training, the educational aids that you may need while you're at college, as well as job placement once you get out of college. What is a typical sequence of related services from the time you're finding out about information about bioptic driving all the way up through driver license testing? If you go through a vocational rehabilitation agency, one of the first things that has to take place is that you have to be determined eligible for services. This will entail sitting down with an assigned counselor, and then from there, she will determine whether or not you're eligible for the program which you're interested in, which in this case would be bioptic driver training. So she would set up an appointment with a doctor of your choice, with the appropriate forms being referred to the coordinator of that specific program. If you're found eligible, then she would arrange for a driving evaluation. From there, you would be placed on a waiting list for driver training, and then once completed, you would be assigned a specific time to go take your driver license test. What's going to be included normally in the interview with the field counselor? This is extremely important for young novice candidates. Remember that vocational rehabilitation will become involved in a positive fashion if they have specific and sincere reasons for giving you assistance. Why would you be seeking their assistance? Well, if you're wanting to get a job, if you're wanting to further your education. Most individuals, as a result of driver licensure, will be able to meet their own basic survival needs instead of being dependent upon friends, family, parents, etc. Independence is one of the biggest things that comes with an independent means of transportation. And being able to go where you want to go, when you want to go, is all part of being self-autonomous. I put this slide in here because oftentimes as programs develop and blossom, this becomes a major problem. So the title of this slide is "The Early Bird Gets the Worm." And the emphasis here is there will be waiting lists for both driver training and driver screening purposes. And you can't expect to contact a counselor, let's say 30 days before the summer months arrive, and let's say you're graduating from high school to college and you'd like to acquire a driver's license so you can drive yourself back and forth to college. It's not going to happen that quickly. You probably should have started in your junior or senior year over your breaks to determine whether or not you're eligible to get these pre-screening things out of the way, and then be scheduled accordingly on the list for training services. Something that you should also be aware of, not all driver rehabilitation specialists will be trained or even want to work with a person with a known or unknown visual problem. And the class size oftentimes is limited because of limited trained staff. In most states, there's also a limited number of instructional sites. In some states like West Virginia, we have one primary site, a public site that provides all the screening and training. In a state like Indiana, they have several private profit training facilities that accept referrals from the state. In most programs, they will offer a priority for select age individuals for certain times of the year. For instance, at the end of May through the latter part of August, oftentimes high school and college students are given priorities to enter Bioptic driver education training programs. The big thing is, do not procrastinate. Step 5, scheduling an eye exam. Here you want to determine, once the eye exam is scheduled, you want to determine if you meet the specific visual requirements for Bioptic driving in your particular state. What's going to place you in an appropriate position? It's if you have a stable ocular condition, if your distance visual acuity with best correction meets the vision requirements for your state, if you have sufficient visual fields, preferably binocularly, but oftentimes states will require a specific level of horizontal field of view as well as vertical field of view. Some states may require, other states it's optional whether you have to have a certain level of color vision. In our particular state of West Virginia, you simply have to have sufficient color vision to detect and to differentiate the colors of the traffic light as well as brake lights and turn signals. You also have to be able to meet a certain level of acuity through the telescope itself. Now, I put this slide in here because sometimes it's important to understand why certain parts of the eye exam are, let's say, especially important for a person with low vision. And I'm just going to highlight bits and pieces of this slide. For instance, in the area of refraction. What we found in West Virginia with our new updated full-time program was when individuals go to an eye doctor, oftentimes they may only need an up-to-date standard refraction either to maintain licensure or to qualify for licensure to begin with. So they may have been living with a low vision condition which may have been corrected by simply a pair of normal refractive eyeglasses. The visual field test is extremely important because driving is primarily a paracentral and peripheral vision task. Confirming your visual diagnosis and prognosis is important to determine whether or not, along with ocular examination, whether there's any additional things the optometrist or ophthalmologist can provide for you to enhance visual functioning. Not all eye doctors will be in a position to evaluate, fit, or prescribe your Bioptic, so you'll have to come up with a particular clinician who has that aptitude and able to provide that service. There may be limits in your particular state or other licensing jurisdiction on the limits of how strong a telescope can be used, how many number of telescopes can be prescribed, etc. The general rule of thumb regarding bioptic strength is as follows. The greater the distance visual acuity loss, the greater the power of the telescopic unit needed to reach the legal limits to qualify for bioptic driver licensure. Usually it falls between 2040 through 2070. Likewise, the greater the distance visual acuity loss, the greater the power of the telescopic unit needed to compensate for such loss, for example, for critical object awareness purposes. And we'll explain this last statement a little bit later in the presentation. Number 6, are you pre-driver ready? Years ago when we did our pilot study in West Virginia, we found out that the individuals who were found pre-driver ready versus those who were not found pre-driver ready actually did well in the following 4 tasks. And during our pilot study, we had the individuals actually execute these particular skills on foot, whereas in our current study, most of these individuals, because they've had years of experience, are now doing them as passengers in car. But the 4 skills are as follows: to receive or take in, to remember or retain, and to follow simple route instructions. The second, to travel a designated route and return the initial starting point using a reverse route or an alternate route. The third, to detect and react in time to critical objects or conditions in your path that suggest that you slow down or modify your path. And lastly, to detect and analyze and cross both stop sign as well as traffic light controlled intersections. This is an example. In this photograph that I'm using from Jennifer Edgar, a certified O&M specialist, picture yourself in the following scenario. You're walking along a block in, let's say, a typical residential small business area. You're approaching the intersection, and your objective is to cross the street in front of you. Does the pavement markings present allow you to suggest which way you're going to scan? Well, in this particular instance, the presence of yellow longitudinal markers in a stop line indicate that this driver is on a two-way street. So as a pedestrian, you should have the skills that allows you during the first part of your crossing, when the light's in your favor, to scan to the left, and then when you get at a midpoint in the crossing, to scan back to the right. Likewise, when you approach a one-way street, does the individual take into account the fact that the stop line goes entirely across the street, which would indicate that his main concern should be scanning in the direction of approaching traffic during the greater majority of his crossing? Step 7, schedule a driver evaluation. Usually this is done in coordination with the person providing the service and the individual, and it usually consists of 3 parts: an interview, sometimes a commentary drive, and an actual behind-the-wheel screening. The driver interview is extremely important, and oftentimes we'll take a look at the composition of the family and how long they've lived at a particular residence. It will then also take a look at what level of vision they have, what is the visual impairment due to, and any other type of medical impairment that may adversely affect the driving task. Taking a look at education is also important because normally most formalized programs of bioptic driver training require a certain level of intelligence. This is one time for allowing an individual who participates in a bioptic driver training program with sharing with the instructors whether they have had any legal or illegal driving experience. Because all of these prior skills, whether it's the utilization of a bicycle, an ATV, driving on back roads, all develop things that we refer to as distance viewing skills, called eye lead time, eye scanning, etc. The driving interview will also uncover the true reasons why that particular person wants to drive. Do they themselves want to drive, or are they being pushed into driving by a parent, a spouse, a counselor, etc.? One of the things we also like to bring up is, are there other alternate means of transportation in that person's home area? The reason is, our success rate at the present time, and we've been involved in this for approximately 20 some odd years, is that only about 80% of the individuals that go through training will end up getting their licenses. So that means the remaining 20% more than likely will return to using alternate means of transportation, whether they stay in their particular area or move elsewhere. Knowledge of an individual's participation in sports is also important. For instance, things like basketball, baseball, softball, volleyball, because all of them contain precursors that are useful in driving. Eye lead time, eye scanning, head and eye coordination, etc. Information shared with the driver educator as far as work history is also important, because one of the reasons why Voc Rehab goes to bat for you is the fact that you're willing to go to work once you obtain a driver's license. Commentary drive. This may not be a familiar term to you, and in essence what it is when you're out being evaluated for your potential driving ability, a commentary drive involves sitting in the right front passenger seat and responding to questions that an instructor shares or asks of you. For instance, information that they may want to know whether or not you realize what yellow pavement markings down the middle of the road mean, okay? What yellow diamond-shaped signs mean. They may ask you, how far out can you see a particular type of object? And there's three terms here that are called awareness acuity, identification acuity, and sure acuity. Awareness acuity refers to the fact when you look out as far as you can, you may see something, but you may not be able to identify or even use from your past visual memory what it is. As you drive closer, you may be able to give it an educated guess like, I believe it looks like a red car. And then as you get closer yet, you say, now I definitely know it's a red Mustang. Things we also take a look at during the commentary drive is how well can you use your side vision. For instance, if we establish a position on the middle lane on an interstate and we ask you to look out as far as you can, as cars pass us on the left or right, we emphasize the use of your peripheral or side vision to pick those up as soon as possible. Things like glare and sunlight tolerance, as well as reaction to changes in natural lighting. Things here we determine whether or not you can benefit from the use of adaptive sunwear in addition to the use of your bioptic lens systems. And what transpires when you go under a interstate overpass, and things like going underneath a train trestle, etc. I wanted to share with you some of the up-to-date technology that is now available for use with particular type of bioptic lens systems. Most notably here would be the BITA systems. We had these manufactured by a company called Noir Medical Technologies. They're a little bit smaller than the large adult size flip-up clip-on sunwear, and a little bit larger than the child type sunwear. They can come in a variety of different type of colors, different types of intensity, etc. For example, individuals with both ocular and oculocutaneous albinism oftentimes finds the light blue-gray and the darker blue-gray very effective on sun or glare control. And these are the type of devices that they are placed over, the Conforma BITA lens system. The driving evaluation itself consists of a series of braking steering reaction tests, and then once out in the car, how familiar is the individual with the basic vehicle controls? How well do they do once they start the car and begin to drive in a very controlled atmosphere at speeds, let's say, between 15 and 20 in reference to speed control, lane maintenance? Overall, do they increase or decrease the likelihood of hazard or collision? And is a certain level of confidence and calmness established by the end of the evaluation by both student and instructor? Step number 8. Let's assume now at this point that you've passed the screening and you're now going to prepare yourself to take the instructional permit test. Some states require that you wait until a particular time limit before you start training. They may require certain types of reports. For example, submission of all of your evaluation reports, an updated vision report, a certificate of eligibility, and when you go to take your test, it may be taken on a computer, written, or it can be taken orally, and it covers both road laws and road signs. With the onset of computers, you can now take a practice test online. In most states, a passing score is usually about 19 out of 25. If you fail, you must wait at least 7 days prior to your second attempt. Permits for people with low vision who use bioptic lens system oftentimes have restrictions. If I use West Virginia as an example, the Class G permit used for our program requires that you maintain it for at least 30 days. It's only good for driving with an instructor or a specially trained examiner. And in our particular program, it's good for 1 year. Step number 9. You've been screened, you've passed your instructional permit test, and now you've been invited back for training. Some of the things that you should check out in advance are, does your licensing jurisdiction, state, province, etc., does it require or is bioptic driver training optional? When presented, is it presented sequentially or versus concurrently? Sequentially would mean you have to complete classroom, then passenger in car, then behind the wheel training, or can you obtain all 3 types of training at the same time, Monday through Friday, 9 to 3, like we do in West Virginia? The types of instruction oftentimes included in a formalized program of instruction involve classroom, passenger in car, and behind the wheel. A sampling of some of the areas that are involved in formalized bioptic driver training are defensive driving skills, critical object awareness skills, hazard perception skills, bioptic utilization skills, and on-road driving assessment. Here are some photos giving you examples of eye-lead time. When you're going 20 miles an hour in a residential area, it may mean 2 blocks. But at highway speeds, it may mean a half a mile to a mile down the roadway. We mentioned to you before critical objects. These objects or conditions are things that the driver can predict are going to cause a change in lane position and or speed. So for example, roadway characteristics in this visual scene would entail the number of lanes of traffic and the restricted sight distance presented by the hill. The traffic control devices would be the double yellow line and the the bus stop sign over here on the right. Other road users, drivers coming in either direction, or if the car backs out of this laundromat on the side. Hazard perception skills, identifying situations where you or others may fail to see one another. Take a close look at both of these photos. You'll notice that you have an oncoming car and then suddenly you only see the top of the car. If you take a closer look, you'll notice there is a split in the pavement markings as well as an absence of sidewalk or an offset of the sidewalk on this side. Oftentimes these are visual clues that you have a fairly significant dip in the road. Basic bioptic utilization skills. This is a skill that we hold off until the end of the first week in training and then start on foot and go from there. Some of the basic things that we go over is the nearness illusion, that when you look through the telescope, in other words, things are brought up, but in reality they're several times further away, depending upon the power of the scope. The reduced field of view presented when you go down into the telescope. The movement of objects or forms that you experience when you go into the telescope and move head and eye simultaneously. The magnified field of view moves in the opposite direction to your head movement. And then we go into other skills as we get further and further apart in 10-yard increments. For example, the jack-in-the-box effect that sometimes bioptic lens users experience when they're being passed by a large vehicle on the interstate and they suddenly pull into your lane, and you notice this individual almost right on top of you, but in reality they could be 2 to 4 times further away. Likewise, other things that we take a look at. How well from a distance can the bioptic lens user decipher what a human is doing down the roadway? Here I am simulating going into a mailbox and then coming back across the street reading the mail. Here I'm bent over simulating changing a tire, and here I'm representing a deer that's been killed and is lying on the roadway. Okay? Skills like a basic survival, hand over hand waving, individual walking up to the side of the road, individual walking with his back towards traffic, and then individual walking correctly towards traffic with the near lane. A few things I also wanted to add in this presentation that some of our candidates for bioptic driver training have come to use when they're not able to decipher the speed control on our driver education vehicles. This is an example of a cell phone in a bracket, and you can enlarge the speed that's run off of GPS systems or satellites and tell you your speed in large print. And then it will also indicate in smaller print what the speed in that particular roadway is. This is a little bit of a different view from it from the driver's perspective. The device that holds the phone in place can be purchased locally at Radio Shacks. It's called a mobile device holder. This is what it kind of looks like in the wrap. And this is the particular information if you want to order it online. But like I say, it's available at a local Radio Shack. I'm going to pass over this. This is just referring to additional parts of training involving driver assessments, both non-rated and rated. As you get further and further along in your training, you will be exposed to these. One of the tasks that we expose all of our students to as part of their training is the dreaded left-hand turn at grade and at restricted line of sight intersections. This is part of our 40-mile, 90-minute in length driver performance test. It must be passed before the individual is eligible for driver license road testing. Here's an example of a restricted line of sight that involves turning left to get onto an interchange at a rural interchange in West Virginia. Oftentimes people ask, Chuck, do you know approximately how many states offer some type of bioptic driver training? To the best of my knowledge, these 20 states offer some type of training. If you need contact persons, you can contact me offline. Best time to call me by phone is between 3:30 and 4:45, or anytime by way of email. Another way that you can find out about your particular state and whether or not formalized training is offered and who offers it is to go to the ADED website. It's www.aded.net. It stands for, in years past, the Association for Driver Educators for the Disabled. The acronym has remained the same, but it's now called the Association for Driver Rehabilitation Specialists. And once again, they list a state-by-state list of certified driver rehabilitation specialists, contact information, etc. Number 10, scheduling your on-road test once you've completed training. Some of you may agree with me and others may be adamantly opposed to what I share with you, but I've listened to a comment oftentimes I share when I present on the misconceptions versus reality connected with low vision driving and bioptics. And I've included it here to be sure that you are aware of what you face when you go for on-road testing. Low vision drivers, including those who use bioptic lens systems, oftentimes are required to take an on-road driving test that is different, longer, and more challenging than given to normally sighted applicants. Some people think it's discriminatory, others do not. Why do I think it's non-discriminatory? Well, number one, it provides proof of current driver competency versus waiting for years for accrued driving records which don't always tell whether or not you're a competent driver. It can also be useful in an appeals or court process and also serves as a safeguard when driver training is not available, required, or limited. And remember, bioptic driver training varies from state to state. How does normally sighted driver testing compare to low vision driver testing? Normally sighted applicants usually are only evaluated for basic maneuverability skills, and normally at speeds between 15 and 20 miles an hour. Whereas low vision drivers must participate in not only basic maneuverability skills, but oftentimes participate in commentary driving skills and on-road driving skills. Number 11. I'm going to briefly go through this. There's about 5 slides that deal with the appeal process, and the reason for including this here is this. You may find out that your state offers formalized driver training, and you may go through and complete the driver training satisfactorily. But remember, it's a separate agency that will either allow or disallow testing as well as awarding a driver's license. If you're denied by your respective licensing jurisdiction or DMV, you can request an administrative hearing. DMV, if they allow a hearing, will advise you of a date, a time, and a location. In the meantime, you should be selecting witnesses who are willing, available, and appropriate to testify on your behalf. Sometimes you may have to present in advance when you request the hearing, or you may be able to present this at your hearing itself. But you want to collect together, organize, and furnish copies of all written evidence and documentation that lends support to an applicant's candidacy for driving. These next things are very important, but oftentimes are taken for granted. You want to arrive at your hearing site ahead of schedule, clean, well-groomed, and wearing appropriate attire or dress. Feel free to establish rapport with the hearing examiner. If there is information that DMV brings to the hearing, you want to request an opportunity to review it, any and all DMV case file information regarding yourself before the hearing starts. The scope of the hearing will determine, in essence, your ability, whether you're an applicant or a licensee's competency to drive. Before testifying, all witnesses will be sworn in under oath. A hearing examiner will ask simple questions from time to time, but mostly listen and remain impartial throughout the recorded testimony. Hearings normally last 1 hour, pending the number of witnesses. Decisions of hearings are based on findings of fact and conclusions of law. After review, the DMV Commissioner will make and enter an order. They will affirm, rescind, or modify the earlier order. If the Commissioner makes or enters an order affirming his or her earlier order of denial, suspension, restriction, or non-renewal, the applicant or the licensee is entitled to judicial review as set forth in your state code. Judicial review means you can take them to court. If judicial review fails, an applicant or licensee may file a discrimination complaint through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSB, Office of Civil Rights. And lastly, when should you stop driving, and why did I include this in steps to becoming a licensed driver? Sooner or later, all of us, at one point in our lives, if we're fortunate to live long, we may be faced with the fact is, should we continue to drive? While there may be a number of things that may be used to determine whether or not you should continue to drive, one of the things that I use is when you get to the point where you're unable to execute an unprotected left-hand turn or crossing at an at-grade intersection or a restricted line of sight intersection, you should give up the keys. An example of what that would look like is a secondary highway here, turning left against oncoming traffic, or at an intersection presenting two-way traffic meeting one-way traffic. At this time, I will address questions that any of the members of the audience have.
Well, thank you, Chuck. That was fantastic. I'm proud of you. You got through it all. The interesting thing, and I hope that I was clearer earlier, that I've only received one question so far. So please, those of you who have questions, feel free to type them in now. I don't believe that I've seen any come in, except one question specifically is, what are the requirements for bioptic driving in Louisiana? We were afraid of this question. We thought that we might get 20 questions for 20 different states. So do you want to give that a real quick
I sure can.
Address that one quickly, and please, anybody who has questions, send them in now.
Okay, and the reason why I will address this is years ago, when the state of Louisiana decided to address the bioptic driving issue, I was one of 3 individuals that was involved in the training of not only DMV staff, but also driver rehabilitation specialists, which came forth interested in wanting to work with low vision candidates who are exploring driving in Louisiana. The cutoff as far as carrier lens is at 2200, including 2200. The level of acuity through the telescope, I'm not positive, but I think it only has to be 2060 or 2070 and not 2040. There is training that's required, and there is a specific type of road test that's required prior to granting driver licensure. I do have contact persons for that program. If you're interested in contacting me offline or calling me tomorrow, I'll be more than welcome to address that.
All right. We have a big thank you coming from a friend in South Dakota. Thanks, Chuck, for sharing your knowledge, awesome information, but doesn't have a question right now.
Okay.
One quick one here. How should you proceed if your state doesn't offer any formalized bioptic training? And this one looks like it's coming from Colorado.
Okay. Um, One of the suggestions I would have is the individual can feel free to contact me if they've not been provided any type of training by the dispensing clinician and they're not available. One of the first things they can do is go online to the ADAD website and determine whether or not, even though it's not required, if there are any professionals in that particular state that offer any type of device training, classroom training, or behind the wheel training. It's not something where you, I'll give you an example. The state of Arizona for many years was very conservative in reference to driving with low vision, much less the acceptance or allowance of bioptics. Now they permit the use of bioptics all the way down to and including 2200, but do not require any type of special training with the scope, no special training behind the wheel, and no special on-road testing. But even though it's not required, approximately 50 to 60% of the individuals who've sought out driver licensure have did it on their own, either using their private resources or getting third-party assistance. So it may not be required by law, but if you seek hard enough, you should be able to find it. I have a large directory of contacts nationwide that I will be more than willing to share with anyone if you'll just either email me or call me. It's better to email me because oftentimes I may get 3 or 4 requests in a day, and it may take me a little bit of time to research it, but I'll be more than willing to do it.
Do you know of any driver training programs that use computer simulation?
There probably are a number of them. For instance, and I'll include us, we've recently purchased a $30,000 simulator. Unfortunately, we haven't had an opportunity to integrate it into our program at the present time because of the fact that we've changed residences within the past 12 months and we're still trying to get settled. There is a place for driver simulation. Oftentimes we'll say that it's of particular importance and benefit to the novice young driver who may, for instance, the first time around in classroom may not get all the bits and pieces that you would want them to get. So by reinforcing things using driver simulation, they learn it a little bit more thoroughly. In years past, we used to require, in addition to our classroom work, we used to require young novice drivers also participate in evening classroom instruction provided to individuals with other disabilities as well. So in answer to your question, yes, there are a number of states, each use driver simulation, oftentimes in different capacities. Sometimes as part of the screening process, other times as part of both classroom and then simulation or self-study purposes in addition to classroom.
This is going to be an interesting one. We've got a bunch of questions here, Chuck, so we're going to try to get through them as best we can in the next 15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
What has been the most effective steps at changing state laws in states that currently do not allow bioptic driving?
I think it involves educating people. I think the internet has done wonders. What oftentimes I found effective is if an individual comes forward from a state that does not allow bioptic driving and they'll say, I have a legislator that's willing to sponsor a bill, but they know little or nothing about bioptic driving. And the internet now has loads and loads of information about bioptic driving, and I serve as one of those sources. One of the states that are currently involved in that process is the state of South Carolina. It's passed on the Senate side. It's now being reviewed on the House bill side. And there's a collaborative effort among eye doctors, driver rehab specialists, and consumers to educate legislators. One of the things that we found very effective was to do a little hands-on work with legislators using the loaner bioptic lens systems, as well as showing them the Indiana bioptic driving video. Both of those proved overwhelming in our state 2 years ago when our bill passed unanimously.
Here's an interesting question. I'm guessing that due to the complexity of the specialized driving test, it would be best to wait for my child until my child is older, perhaps into the early 20s, to try to obtain a license rather than at the normal legal age, which in I think a lot of states is about 16. Do you have any statistics regarding the age at which there is the highest rate of passing these tests?
Okay. In our program, even after formalized training, we have about a 79% passage rate first time around, okay? And normally we have close to 100% the second time they go to take the test. Something that I should share with you, and especially if this particular person contacts their voc rehab, oftentimes voc rehab agencies will want to open a case on an individual once they become of working age. Sometimes this can occur at 15, sometimes certain individuals won't go to work till 17. But a lot of times they won't want to open up a case until the person's of working age. That may mean between their junior and senior year or after they graduate from high school. So you need to take that into consideration as well. If you have a well-motivated young person, I wouldn't hesitate to pursue it. We've had a couple of those through our program. They've been very successful. If your son or daughter is resistant to the concept of driving at age 16, do not force them. That's one of the worst things you can do. But one of the things you should do is, instead of having them remain in the back seat playing video games, is to get them up in the front right seat to have them go from being a passive passenger to an active passenger.
I'm not sure exactly what the questioner has in mind here, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. Is the bioptic telescopic lens usually helpful? That's all it says.
Okay, very good. Okay. And sometimes people will say they wear it, but they don't use it. Okay? What can the telescopic portion of the device help with? And this is just based on my years of experience of teaching people what it should be used for. Things like detection of distant detail off of any type of desired road sign, whether it's a regulatory sign, such as a stop sign, a yield sign, deciphering information off of guidance signs or directional type signs, picking up traffic lights at more normal distances. This is one of the biggies. Picking up distant activities that may involve construction sites, an accident site, a disabled vehicle. All of those things come to be paramount, even on a familiar route that a person may travel day after day. Some say, well, why don't you simply drive slower and then react to it as you drive closer to it? Yes, you can do that way, but oftentimes driving slower in certain environments can get you killed or someone else, killed. So slower speeds isn't always the answer. And what I found is if a person is appropriately screened, trained, and tested, individuals with known levels of low vision can use bioptics safely under a variety of different type of driving conditions, primarily during the daytime.
I'm going to read two questions together here, and it's actually probably more than two questions, but they're all tied together. Are there people who administer final driving tests, are the people who administer the final driving test well prepared for low vision drivers? Are they usually informed beforehand? And the other question related to that is, do all, actually no, that's a different question. Why don't you go with those there?
Okay. As far as do driver examiners receive special training, in the states that I've been affiliated with or provided service to, they are better than well trained. For example, fellow staff and I in years past and present have provided training for DMV examiners along with driver rehabilitation specialists from the states of Maryland, Virginia, Kentucky, Oregon, Louisiana, etc. So in those instances where states contact us, we usually provide them usually a day of overview of becoming aware of certain types of pathology that respond well to magnification. We share with them how the bioptic is supposed to be used. We actually take them out in car and show them techniques for assessing low vision bioptic drivers. So do all states have examiners that are trained to examine bioptic drivers? In honesty, not all, but a growing number are. And a lot of times it's a matter of just sharing information. I'll just use our facility in our state as an example. We have trained professionals from 20 different states and one province of Canada. We've provided 69 free staff and services that have involved training DMV officials, OTs that have become driver educators. So a number of people come through our day-and-a-half seminar and go away with skills which oftentimes they in turn will self-train or provide staff training to the examiners of their state as well.
Let's try to get through these, a couple of, hopefully these will be shorter answers questions with shorter answers. Can you get auto insurance easily for bioptic drivers, or is it too costly?
Okay. Usually driver insurance is not the problem, but you should be aware that just like a normally sighted individual, if you are single, 27 years of age or less, and if you're a male, you're going to pay more for car insurance, okay, whether you're low vision or regular or normal sighted, okay? And I'll use West Virginia as an example. In West Virginia, as long as the driver licensing authority is willing to license you, individuals who sell car insurance in your state cannot charge any greater amount because of your physical disability, okay, than a normally sighted person. But they can charge you more because of your age, your sex, etc. Okay?
Can you get a driver's license? Okay, it moved on me there. Sorry about that. Can you get a license in a state and then drive in a different state which doesn't allow bioptic driving?
Yes. This is protected by a federal statute. It's a reciprocity agreement where if you're licensed in one state, you can drive cross country as long as there's no restrictions on your in-state license that entail a certain radius from your home, etc. You must abide by the daytime restriction if you have one, or as well as the type of roadway if there are any restrictions in that particular nature. But you can drive in any particular state. There is a licensing agreement at the federal level that permits you to do so.
Here's an interesting question. Any idea how many bioptic drivers are on the road?
Several years ago, I estimated somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000. That was 10 years ago. My estimate at the present time would be somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 12. 10 years ago, the state of Michigan had the largest number. I believe the states of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois are catching up. Some states have become more conservative with their visual regulations for bioptic driving. Examples, the state of Washington, the state of California. And usually, for instance, the state of California did this as a result of one single accident involving a senior driver who was not a Bioptic user, but because it was an accident producing death, they kind of tightened up the reins. So, I hope that answers your question.
Do all certified driver rehabilitation, again it jumped on me, I can't read them if they move. Do all certified driver rehabilitation specialists have knowledge of bioptic training, or do we need to seek a specialized instructor with the specific expertise?
And to answer your question, the ADAD organization, which certifies driver rehabilitation specialists for a variety of disabilities, does not have per se a special certification or required training to work with bioptic drivers, but more than likely that's where you'll find individuals that are willing to work with them and have experience. That's where normally you want to use that as a factor in determining, what type of instructor. I would like to see ADAD come up with a special certification for working with bioptic drivers and not necessarily having to be certified to work with other disabilities. Like medicine, driver rehabilitation is becoming very filled with expertise. So not all individuals that may work with deaf individual drivers, they may want to work with visually impaired drivers or limb impaired drivers, etc.
Have you had any experience with someone with low vision and ADHD successfully obtaining a license?
In years past, when we ran our pilot study from 1985 through 1998, we did a lot more screening that would discover certain things related to performance, related to ADHD. But currently, we may be working with such individuals, but may not even be aware that they have the problem. I don't know if that's going to answer your question, but I would think that it may be a little bit more, the program may have to extend a little bit longer, from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And some programs can do that. Others are very rigid in their time restraints. I would never rule out, just because an individual had an attention deficit problem, that they couldn't participate in a formalized program of instruction. I would handle it on a case-by-case basis.
Going back to the question about that I asked earlier, here's a variation of that. The questioner asked that if my state does not allow bioptic driving, can I go to another state and then return to my home state and continue driving?
Yep. Sometimes a state may permit that, but I'll give you an example why at the present time we can't do that here in West Virginia. West Virginia requires that you have a Class G West Virginia driving permit. In order to get that, you have to be a resident of our state, I believe, for at least 30 days. Okay? I would like to see, as our program expands, that we have a reciprocity agreement where our state DMV would recognize a permit of another state and allow the individuals to be trained at our facility, since part of our basic contractual arrangements are done with federal tax dollars and state tax dollars. The concern that you also have is who's going to do the driver license testing and then licensing upon completion of training. Is it feasible in the future to be trained out of state and come back in state? I think it is. It's going to take some collaborative efforts between DMVs, but I think it's realistic. But truthfully, I think more and more states are going to go to the acceptance of it. At the present time, I'm aware of at least 43 states that now allow the use of telescopes, and I anticipate within 5 years that it's going to be universally accepted nationwide, and more states are going to develop their own programs. So this is going to become a moot point in years to come.
Does someone ever have to retake the driving test if they don't get a speeding ticket or a traffic violation? I'm going to assume that the questioner means a bioptic driver as opposed to a normal a regular driver.
Okay, that's an excellent question. We have procedures that are part of the procedural agreements that DMV uses, where our bioptic drivers on an annual basis are required to submit a vision reexamination. If the individual from DMV that reviews those notices a reduction in vision, whether it's in acuity and or field, but they still maintain the vision requirements, they can request additional training, driver retesting, etc. In the event that an individual has a specific number of moving violations, they can also, DMV can also request that they come back for additional training and or retesting as well. So in answer to your question, at least I know in our particular state, that is a procedure that's being followed rather very conservatively, and I concur with that approach.
This is an interesting question here that I'm going to interpret a little bit. We have a young listener who has albinism, and they're before driving age, and the listener asks, well, how do they, and maybe we can reverse this and ask it for the parents as well. This particular child is wondering about how, their parents are very concerned about this individual possibly driving, and they're worried sick about it. How would you address that, Chuck, first to the child or the young person considering, or really anybody considering being a low vision driver, and how would you answer that to the parents?
Okay, one of the things that oftentimes I will emphasize to an individual or an individual group that I present before, as far as, at what time is the appropriate time to seriously consider driving, and what can I do to better prepare myself, and things that I think we should place more emphasis on is the 90 to 95% of the time that you won't be looking into the telescope, and develop those appropriate skills. For instance, good distance viewing skills, what we call eye lead time, head and eye scanning, following distance from the vehicle head, critical object awareness skills. For instance, get that son or daughter or spouse up in that front right seat and have them go from being a passive passenger where they show no interest in driving and are sitting there texting their friends or playing video games, to becoming better aware of what the father or spouse is doing behind the wheel, and how other drivers are responding to what the driver of their vehicle is doing. It's the development of distance viewing skills, critical object awareness skills, hazard perception skills. If those things can be earned or learned at an early age, there's a possibility that the amount of time needing to be spent in a formalized program of instruction, let's say 10 to 20 years from now, may be significantly reduced. The problem we're faced with right now is there are a number of people from a number of states who in years past have been passed over or said they would never drive, so they didn't pay attention to the dynamics of driving. This is going to be changing during the next 1 to 2 decades. People are going to become better drive or pre-driver savvy before they become of licensing age, and there won't be that developmental delay between the person with low vision versus the person with normal vision. In other words, they'll be able to better compete with their peers, not only in education, but also when it comes to the practice of driver education. From a parental standpoint, again, I would emphasize to the parent, emphasize things other than the basic use of the telescope. The use of the telescope will come over time and can be easily taught by the professional. Not to say that a parent can't reinforce certain things, but it's not going to be the determination. You can be an excellent bioptic lens user, but become a terrible driver. So it's better to develop those skills that you're going to be using 90 to 95% of the time, and let the professionals deal with the use of the telescope when they come in for formalized training.
The remaining questions that we have are that came in are really kind of specific. So I think since we're coming up close to the end of our time here, I would encourage those individuals to contact Chuck directly with the information that you see on your screen. And I'd really like to thank you, Chuck. This has been an outstanding presentation, full of lots of information. We had in the neighborhood of about over 50 people participated tonight from all over the country and maybe all over
Excellent.
the world. And just a reminder to those that are listening and watching that this webinar is going to be posted on NOAA YouTube, on the NOAA YouTube channel within a few days. So if you missed something or you'd like to be able to share this with other people, please remember to take a look at that. Also, participants will receive an email in the next day or two asking you to fill out an evaluation. I really would like you to do that. It helps us determine what works and what doesn't work, and it helps us fine-tune these presentations and get even better information out there to the albinism community. And I also strongly suggest that you keep an eye out on your email boxes for announcements from NOAA regarding other webinars and new webinars and teleconferences, and to check the NOAA website for future events such as events in your area and NOAA's big show, which is coming up. Our 14th National Conference will be held in St. Louis, Missouri, July 12th to 15th. Registration is now open, and we are looking forward to a big crowd of people rolling on the river. So again, Chuck, thank you very kindly for your expertise tonight. This has been fantastic, and thank you everyone for participating.